If you're interested in painting miniatures for either board games or for wargaming and you're not sure where to start, stick around. I'm going to help give you some guidance on that, in addition to showing you how to take it to the intermediate level and then how to get into the advanced stuff when you're ready. Let's get to it. What's going on, guys? Jared here from Mini Junkie. I wanted to put a video together to help you guys who have never painted a miniature before. You open up a box, whether it's Games Workshop stuff or a board game with 100 miniatures in it, and you know that you want to make them look awesome and paint them, but you just don't know where to start. And I'm going to show you three kind of phases here. The first phase is going to be like just getting started, like the bare minimum you need to buy or should buy to help you get started, help you get acquainted with this hobby, because it can be daunting. And there's a lot of advice out there, and I kind of want to say this to the forum people out there. You have to remember that someone who's never painted before, if you start hitting them with difficult advice or overwhelming them with things they need to think about, it can be off-putting and create a barrier. Painting miniatures is not complicated to get started. It's only when you get advanced and into some of those intermediate techniques that you start to add in layers of complexity. But like I said in the intro, what I'm going to do is show you how to get started, and then let's say months or years, not years, but months later, when you're starting to hit a ceiling on what you're able to do and you feel like you're ready to push it to the next level, I'll show you what like a phase 2 intermediate could look like, and the types of tools, brushes, paints, whatever that you can start to add to your repertoire as you start to level up your painting. And then I'll touch briefly on the more advanced stuff, like when you've been painting a couple years, or maybe you have been painting a couple years, and what are some of the cool things you could start to add, whether it be airbrushing or whatever. You know, kind of like the minimum to start adding that kind of stuff as well. Let's get to it, and I'll show you some stuff. All right, guys, so what you see before you here, I'm just going to maybe try to zoom out slightly, is what I would say everything you need to start painting miniatures. And by that, and again, to start painting miniatures, just the basics, the basic basics of what you need to get started and nothing more. So, and a few of these things are even optional, so there's that. So I'm going to walk through what each thing is and why you need it, and then you know, obviously in the comments ask any questions you might have, but I'll get started. So the first thing is a primer. Now, I would recommend a spray primer, because if you're just getting started, I don't think you're going to have an airbrush. You can brush on your primer. I don't do it, and I'm not a huge fan of it. I don't think you're going to get a great result that way, and I think it's pretty easy to get yourself a spray primer. This is Tamiya. There's Army Painter, there's Privateer Press P3, there's Citadel primers, all kinds. So you should be able to find yourself either a white or gray or a black primer to use. Black is typically used for when you're painting darker miniatures or darker colors, and white can be more forgiving when you're painting anything you want to be bright or have pop. Get yourself a spray primer, prime your model, and you be good. Sorry, I omitted two things. Kind of separate from that is assembling your models. So again, plastic cement or Tamiya, you know, anything called plastic glue works with sprue models like these. And you can use super glue to assemble metal models or plastic models that don't come on a sprue. So I did a whole video about glue, so I thought maybe I'll just throw that in here. You need water, so you need yourself a cup of water. Don't spill it, because you're going to use paints that are water-based acrylic paints, okay? There are a number of different brands that you can choose from that are going to be great for this. These are Citadel, so that's the ones you purchase at like a Games Workshop. Make sure this guy's in focus here. Same deal with Privateer Press P3 paints. They also work great, or Vallejo. Here it's the Game Color line. They also make Model Color. They make a number of lines, but you may be best off to start with Game Color. So you're gonna, you know, those are all water soluble. So, man, I still have plastic putty on my thumb from my last video. I also recommend a shade of some kind. That would be helpful for, you know, as you're learning to paint, you put down a base coat, shade it with a wash, then go back over it with your base coat to highlight. These, I'm not really, this isn't a learn to paint kind of video, but here you got Agrax Earth Shade, which is a nice brown kind of wash or shade from Citadel and from Games Workshop, and then you've got Army Painter makes a few different ones. This is called Strong Tone. You just brush it on and it works great. So I would recommend a set of paints and then a set of washes, and you should be good. You don't, I mean, strictly speaking, you don't even need to varnish your dudes if you don't want to, at least not when you're getting started. I don't know if people are playing with like sandpaper hands or what, but I mean, even without varnish, most models, especially plastic ones, are going to be just fine. If you want to add varnish later, that's great, and there'll be probably different videos for that as well. I would recommend against like buying a starter set of paints, because there's potential there that you're not going to get the paints you want, or you're going to get paints you don't need and stuff like that. I would say pick what you want, pick the model that you're inspired to paint, whatever that might be. Look at what colors you want to paint that guy, whether it's through guides or just an understanding of what you want. Maybe you want to make a blue wizard or something, and then buy yourself some colors that are appropriate for that. I think somebody just fell and hurt themselves upstairs. If you're doing wood elves, get yourself a few different types of greens to use, but basically hand pick your paints. It's easy enough to do, and then start to build from there, as opposed to a giant paint set of stuff you don't need. For assembly, you also need, for sure, a sharp X-Acto knife. This is used for cleaning pretty much any kind of model, and for scraping mold lines off. Works great for the kind of models like Star Wars Legion are, where it's a plastic that's not on a sprue, but it also works great for sprue models and miniatures. And this is kind of an optional thing. These are sprue side cutters. This is a Tamiya brand, kind of an expensive set, but you can get, you might be hearing R2-D2, that's my phone. You can also get, cheaper brands for this as well. And these are used to like snip pieces off the sprue. So you will need that if you're doing like Games Workshop style or Warhammer or anything like that. So the brushes. You're going to want, in my opinion, this is the bare minimum set of brushes you should probably get yourself. First is like a #1 size brush. This is a kind of an expensive one. You don't need it to be that. #1 size, which I think would equate to like, for GW brushes would be like a base coat brush or maybe a layer brush. So just look for something that's like, it's not tiny and it's not huge. It's just like a nice mid-range size. And most of the time they're going to retain their tip nicely, and they'll work for a lot of even small work. You don't need like a 000 or 00 or anything like that. Next I would get a wash brush, which is used for applying these shades. It has a thicker belly or body in the brush to hold some more of that wash as you're applying it. I would get a dry brush. This is a small dry brush from GW, but basically anything that's like a wedge shape that you're just going to brush back and forth over your miniature when you're dry brushing. Again, that's a whole technique that we won't cover here. And I also would recommend a cheap craft brush. This is a, I don't know, just synthetic brush that I use this, let's say you're applying something that's like a texture paste or something that you don't want to use your nicer brushes for. I just like to have a workhorse brush for some of the messier stuff and not wreck my paint brushes. Home stretch here, I use these sort of palettes with little wells because I like having either something for my washes or to mix in, or a flat surface to just put a little paint on. And these are cheap. I think you can get these for like $2 or something. And if you wash them after you use them, or what I do, I'm gonna have to admit that I have like tons of them, and I've just been buying them over the years, and I just keep a stack, and when I run out, and I soak them all and I strip them all and start over again. But yeah, you can wash these out and reuse them over and over and over again, and they're cheap. Other alternatives, there's like GW makes like a palette paper, which is not super cheap, and I would say you can't really reuse it that much. You can use plates, ceramic plates. You can use all kinds of different stuff, but I use this. And then for stirring the paint or taking it out of, let's say, taking it out of these kind of bottles and stuff, I use coffee stir sticks, the plastic ones. I prefer that over like toothpicks because these won't leave like fibers in your paint. There's all different ways. You can also just use your brush, but I don't like to get paint up in the ferrule part, the metal part of the brush, so I use these instead. And these are cheap too. They're like $4 for a box of like 1,000 or something, so you can use them for a long time. And there's one other thing you need that isn't on the table but is part of the video, and that's light. You need to be able to see what the heck you're doing. These have a lot of small detail. You don't want to be straining your eyes and not seeing your colors properly, so you need you know, even a swing arm lamp kind of thing will work fine, or a desk lamp that you can put over your work area, or work by a window where you've got light coming in. If you're painting mostly at night though, one option is like, this is a daylight bulb. God, it's kind of old school, isn't it? It's like an actual filament bulb, which you hardly see those anymore. There's also another kind would be these compact fluorescent. I ordered these on eBay. It's a nice, in either case, they're called daylight bulbs or natural lights. You really have nice color reproduction and nice visibility when you're using them. And these are like super bright, which is great. But yeah, so there's a few options there, but at the end of the day, the goal is to have light to see what the heck you're working on. That's all you need to start painting miniatures, really. There are lots of different things you can add to start to level that up a bit, and I'll probably talk about that in the next section of the video. It'll be in the same video. In fact, it'll be in a second. We're going to get into like intermediate miniature painting and what you can add to this stuff as you increase your skill level. All right, guys, so let's say you've had your starter sort of set of painting equipment for a while. You've been painting for a few weeks, months, a year, whatever it is. And you feel like you've started to, wanted to add to this and add some new capabilities or try some new techniques and things like that. So what could you add to this as you get to a more intermediate stage and you want to start to explore different options? So I thought about it, and there's not a ton. Like, I mean, the main thing's going to be add more paints. One way of thinking of that would be you could try some new brands. So I like Scale Color or Scale 75 paints. They're just a bit harder to get. I think usually you'll have to order them online. And adding new kinds of metallics or new kinds of texture paints and things like that is an option. So just exploring paint ranges is going to be one of the main things you're going to do as you're starting to branch out. Another idea is to add things like glazes. This is Bloodletter. It's a red glaze, and just sort of experimenting with what glazes can do to the various paints and colors that you're achieving. Same thing with the inks. So this is Game Color ink, and figuring out ways to use this in interesting techniques and for different model effects. I've already used this in a few of my videos, and I'm a big fan of inks and what they can do for you. Thinner medium. So if you're kind of tired of thinning with water, you can try different mediums. I often use this stuff to thin my paint instead of water. Just creates a nice smooth consistency. But yeah, you don't strictly need to use stuff like this. You can usually use water too if you want. If you want to get really fancy, you could get yourself a miniature holder for when you're painting. This is the Citadel one that I don't think they realized how successful this was going to be. I've seen people who buy like 10 of these. Sorry about the noise upstairs, by the way, guys. Or there's different brands. There's like MDF ones, there's plastic ones, there's all kinds. And that's just to hold the miniature in a different way. But a lot of the time, you may just be happy enough just holding the miniature like this with the base. So this is, whoops, this is, I want to call this a bit of a luxury, but it can be nice to use. And probably the last thing is, starting to protect your paint jobs with varnish. So this is a premium airbrush varnish, but you could also hand paint this, I've found, or hand apply it. This is for a nice flat finish. You can use something called Tester's Dull Coat, but I find that actually flattens it more than I want, so I haven't been using it for a long time. But there's all kinds of different varnishes out there that you can try, and that's to protect your paint job if you start to get more serious about it and you want to paint display miniatures, or you've been having problems with paint rubbing off and things like that. One thing you haven't heard me talk about is wet palettes. I am not someone who thinks that everyone needs to use a wet palette or would benefit from using one. I don't use one almost ever. In fact, I don't think I have one right now. I just really just thin my paints in these wells or on a palette, and if I have extra paint I want to save, I literally will scoop it up with a big brush and put it back in the pot, just because waste not, want not. But I don't like save my color between sessions. Realistically, for me, I get through a color all in one session, I'm done. That's not to say wet palettes aren't great for some people who like them, but if you're starting out or even intermediate, I would say it's almost like more than you need. That's just me. That's kind of it for intermediate. I mean, it's like I said, it's about adding more paints, trying new types of paints, new brands, new lines, technical paints and things like that, but really just expanding the repertoire you have to work from. Okay, now I'll talk about when you're really starting to become an expert, what might that look like and what kind of equipment you might add. So now you're in the advanced stage, you've been trying new kinds of paints, you've been starting to add new kinds of brushes, maybe some different sizes to use, or trying some of the more advanced ones. So for example, once you're really a serious painter, I would absolutely recommend, and it's going to be hard to see probably, Winsor & Newton Series 7. It's kind of like the go-to for most serious painters. They're not cheap, they're more expensive. They're a nice Kolinsky sable hair for the brush, or for the tip of the brush. I get a size 1, and that's almost all I use. So a size 1 is kind of the brush that works for almost anything. Sometimes large surfaces will take longer, but as you're, I would start there. There are alternatives to this, of course. I think Rosemary and Company and maybe Raphael. There's a couple other brands, but for me and a lot of the painters I know, Winsor & Newton Series 7. They make a miniature, one called miniature and one that's not. I think I don't actually know the difference. I think it's got to do with the length of the brush part and the ferrule and stuff like that. Either one works fine. Whether it says miniature or not, you can do great with that brush. I think I don't use the miniature one. This is just the basic one. I absolutely love those brushes. The other thing is airbrushing. So I have 2 here, surprisingly, just laying around. Apparently I have way too many airbrushes. Start with, there'll be a whole video about airbrushing because it's a big thing to get into, but this could be used for base coating, for priming, for applying varnishes, for highlighting when you get better with it. If you're going to make I'm not going to get too deep into this. I do like Iwata brands, IWATA. I would recommend starting with some kind of a gravity-fed paint airbrush style. This is a siphon feed, so the bottle attaches to the bottom. These are a little bit more, I just think you would use this less often, and this is for larger jobs where you want to just be painting and painting and painting. So that's what I use that for. But for the average airbrush starter, go with that. Again, I won't go too far into that. This is just a getting started video. And maybe the last kind of things you might think about doing as you get more advanced is to try different kinds of, for example, this is a weathering type of material for creating oil stains on vehicles. They have mud. This is one brand, Vallejo, but there's AK Interactive and stuff like that. So all different kinds where you can try to create different effects on your models, weathering and things like that. Again, not strictly necessary, but something you could branch into. And the other thing is pigments. So this is an actual powder inside. You brush this on your model to create dust and streaking or rust and things like that, and you fix it in place with a pigment fixer. Again, you're starting to get into more advanced techniques with this stuff, but again, this is the advanced section of the video, so what the heck. And from there, it's really sky's the limit as far as how deep you want to go on this stuff. Again, you can get into other brands of paints. I think I showed the scale 75 in the intermediate section, but technically that could also be an advanced kind of paint. And if you guys have other suggestions for what to put in this advanced section of the for people who are getting into this level of painting, post them in the comments. Absolutely, share your observations or things you think are beneficial to have. This is just my opinion and my recommendations and what works for me. So, and again, if you have questions, post them down below and I'll do my best to answer them. But this should help you to get started in this awesome, endless, unbelievably fun and relaxing hobby of miniature painting. I hope you enjoy it. I hope this video has been useful and helpful for you. Please like or share or subscribe if you think it has, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, guys.